My card gets declined for $11.43 worth of groceries, and I hear it before the cashier even says anything. That specific beep, that means everyone in line behind me just heard it too. I already know what's in my account before she tells me, because I've been doing this exact math in my head all week without admitting it to myself. I start putting things back on a little side shelf, the eggs first, then the bread, doing quiet math about what I can afford to lose and still eat something tonight. Nobody says anything. That's almost worse. I can feel the guy behind me not looking at me on purpose, which somehow makes it louder than if he had. I get the total down to $6.80, hand over the last of what's in my checking account, and walk out with a bag that's mostly rice and eggs, telling myself this is temporary, the way I'd been telling myself that for the past 11 months straight. I remember the exact receipt from that day, because 3 years later I still had it, and what I did with it is the part of this story I've never actually told anyone. Here's what almost everyone earning a low salary assumes, and I assumed it too, that saving money is a thing you get to do later once the number on your paycheck gets bigger. Right now doesn't count. Right now is just survival, and the actual financial life, the real one, starts whenever the raise finally comes. That belief feels completely reasonable when you're living it. It's also based on how this actually plays out for most people, almost exactly backwards. Hello everyone, I'm Liam. I usually break down other people's numbers on this channel, but this one's mine because I think what actually happened to me is more useful than hypothetical. If you want more of these honest breakdowns, subscribing means you won't miss the next one. Quick disclaimer, I'm not a financial advisor. This isn't personalized financial advice, and my numbers reflect my own specific situation, not a promise about anyone else's results. So here's the actual claim. The habit you build on a low salary is worth more than the money you'll eventually save on a higher one. Because by the time the raise shows up, you'll either already know how to keep money, or you'll have spent years proving to yourself that you don't. And that second version is a much harder habit to unlearn than people think. And that exact fork in the road is what that $6.80 grocery bag was quietly sitting on top of. A fire doesn't care what size the first piece of wood is. You can start one with a fat, dry log that catches instantly and burns for hours, or you can start one with a handful of thin, damp kindling that barely hold a flame for the first 10 minutes, threatening to die out if you look away. Here's the thing almost nobody tells you about the second fire. If you keep feeding it twig by twig, patiently, refusing to let it go out, it eventually becomes exactly the same fire as the one that started with the big log. Bigger. Actually, in most cases, because a fire that had to be nursed from nothing usually gets built by someone who never takes the flame for granted. That's the entire difference between starting to save on a low salary and starting on a high one. The high salary is the fat log, an easier first 10 minutes. But plenty of fat logs get walked away from precisely because they don't need attention right away, and by the time someone remembers to come back, the fire's gone out completely. The kindling forces you to pay attention immediately, because if you don't, there's no fire at all. I didn't think about any of this 3 years ago in that parking lot. What I thought about was that $11 decline and a decision that had nothing to do with the amount of money I had, which at that point was basically none. What I actually did with almost no money is exactly where this stops being a metaphor. Let's ground this in real research, because your salary doesn't determine your ceiling sounds like something printed on a motivational poster, and I want to show you it's actually closer to a documented pattern. Research summarized by financial planning firm Bolden, drawing on Ramsey Solutions millionaire research, found that most people who reach the top tier of retirement wealth, the top 10%, with retirement assets north of $3 million, built that wealth on ordinary incomes under $100,000 a year. Not executive salaries, not six-figure starting points. Ordinary paychecks run through consistent habits for a long time. Here's why that matters more than it sounds like it should. It means the ceiling most people assume their salary puts on them isn't actually the ceiling doing the limiting. The habit is. A modest income with a strong savings habit consistently outperforms, over long enough time, a larger income with a weak one, which is the exact opposite of what almost every low-salary earner is taught to believe about their own situation. I was 19, making $8.75 an hour at a warehouse job, the night that card got declined. I want to be specific about that number because I need you to understand exactly how little room there actually was and what I still managed to carve out of it anyway. And that number, the one I actually managed to save starting that week, is smaller than you're expecting, which is exactly the point. I started setting aside $15 a week, not from cutting something dramatic. I genuinely didn't have anything dramatic left to cut. It came from switching to a cheaper phone plan and skipping the vending machine at work, which I used to hit almost every shift without thinking about it. $15 a week works out to about $65 a month, invested at a historical average return around 8%. After 5 years, that comes out to roughly $4,780. After 10 years, around $12,240. After 15 years, the point I'm at right now, writing this, approximately $22,490. Built entirely from $65 a month that started at $8.75 an hour. Money I genuinely didn't feel like I had room for the week I started. Here's the part that actually matters more than the dollar figure. Somewhere around year 3, I got a raise. Then another one. My income more than doubled over those 15 years. But the $65 a month didn't stay $65. It grew alongside the raises because the habit was already built before the money showed up to make it easier. I wasn't starting from zero discipline once the paycheck got bigger. I was just feeding a fire that already knew how to burn. And the version of me that never would have started that fire on $8.75 an hour is a version I think about more than you'd expect. Here's what makes this less of a personal anecdote and more of a pattern, because the data backs up something specific about who actually saves. According to a NerdWallet survey conducted with the Harris Poll, 44% of employed Americans report saving at least 20% of their take-home pay. And critically, that behavior doesn't cleanly track with income level the way most people assume it should. Meanwhile, 8% of employed Americans say they save nothing from their paycheck at all, regardless of what that paycheck actually is. Read that gap carefully. It's not simply high earners in the 44% and low earners in the 8%. Income and saving behavior are related, but they're not the same axis, which means the habit itself, not the salary attached to it, is doing more of the work than most financial advice gives it credit for. Somebody making $8.75 an hour who builds the habit early is running the exact same underlying mechanism as somebody making six figures who never does. This is where most people assume the story is basically over. But what almost happened to that $22,490 is the part one actually think about the most. 2 years ago, I nearly pulled all of it out. Not for an emergency, for a car I didn't need, because a coworker had just gotten one and mine had 190,000 miles on it and felt, suddenly, deeply embarrassing to drive. I sat in the dealership parking lot with the loan paperwork half filled out, and the only thing that stopped me was doing the math on what $22,490 compounding for another 15 years actually turns into versus what it turns into if I withdraw it now to feel better about a car for 18 months. I drove the old car home. That decision had nothing to do with willpower in some abstract, admirable sense. It had everything to do with the fact that I'd already spent 3 years watching a small number slowly become a less small one, and I wasn't willing to reset the fire back down to kindling for a feeling that would fade by the following spring. That's what actually changes once the habit outlives the low salary that started it. Not that temptation disappears, but that you've got real evidence sitting in an account of what patience already bought you, which makes the impulsive version of the decision measurably harder to justify to yourself. None of that means this is easy or that it looks the same for everyone starting where I started. And that part deserves to be said honestly before we go any further. I want to be straight with you about something because skipping it would make this whole video a lie. There are people earning less than I was earning that night, in cities where $15 a week genuinely isn't sitting there to redirect, no matter how many vending machine trips they skip or how cheap their phone plan gets. If that's your actual situation, nothing in this video is a judgment on you, and pretending willpower alone bridges that gap would be insulting to what you're dealing with. That's not a motivation problem. It's math, shaped by rent and wages that no amount of discipline single-handedly fixes. But here's the reframe worth taking regardless of where your starting line actually is. This was never really about $15 or $65 a month or any specific figure at all. It's about whether the fire gets started while it's still small enough to manage, so that by the time more fuel eventually shows up, a raise, a better job, some unexpected room, you're not starting from nothing. You're just feeding something that's already been quietly burning the whole time. Now let's go back to that parking lot, because there's one more thing about that receipt I never actually told you. I still have it. Not literally, the paper's long gone, but I took a photo of it that night, sitting in my car outside the grocery store, $11.43 crossed down to $6.80, and I still have that photo saved on my phone, 3 phones later, moved over every single time I upgraded. I don't look at it often, maybe twice a year, usually on a bad day, usually when some part of me is convinced nothing's actually different. It's still just a photo of a receipt. Eggs, rice, a couple other things, a total that used to be a small emergency and is now just a memory with a dollar amount attached. I don't keep it to feel bad about that night. I keep it because it's proof that the version of me standing in that checkout line, putting bread back on a shelf while a stranger politely looked away, was already, without knowing it, about to start something that 11 months of survival mode hadn't managed to kill. You don't need the bigger paycheck to start. You need the fire lit before it shows up.